Hello, welcome back. I'm Bejar of by Tinby and welcome to my workshop series in partnership with Strathmore Paper. In this second video, we'll learn about the glazing or the wet on dry technique by painting two caladium leaves. We'll be painting a caladium red flash and a caladium mist muffet. In this lesson, I'll show you how to build up multiple layers in order to add more depth, dimension, and details to our illustration. I also hope that you were able to finish and enjoy the first lesson as we will be applying the graded wash technique in some of the sections of this artwork. So get your brushes and let's get started. So these are the two caladium leaves that you will be painting in this class. So on the left, we have the caladium red flash, and on the right, we have the caladium mist muffet. These are both heart-shaped caladiums with veining and green and pink freckles in it. So the caladium red flash has brilliant red center and has green texture and dots in it, while the caladium mist muffet has a green base in color with dots and ovals in multiple shades of pink. In this lesson, we'll use multiple painting techniques such as the graded wash technique for the base and the glazing technique for building up color, texture, and details for our leaves. But before we start with these illustrations, let's discuss the materials that we will be preparing for this class. So first is a paper. I'm using Strathmore Ready Cut Watercolor in cold press in the size 8x10. For the paints, I'm using MaimeriBlu Watercolors in gouache. And for the caladium red flash, I'll be using Carmine gouache and use it as watercolor, making it more transparent than opaque. And for its details and texture, you can use sap green gouache. And for its details and texture, you can use sap green gouache or Hooker's green watercolors. For the caladium mist muffet, I'll be using sap green watercolor for the color of the leaf and Carmine and white gouache for the details. For the brushes, I'm using Princeton Aqua Elite in 1, 2, and 4. So again, the idea here is to use one smaller brush in detailing and one larger brush for blending it with clean water. And for the palettes, I'll be using ceramic palettes. And of course, 2 cups of water. One for cleaning the brushes and another one for my clean source of water. And lastly, a tissue wherein I can dab my brushes for better water control. So start with a light sketch of the artwork. You need to draw 2 leaves. As for this lesson, we'll work on 2 illustrations. You can access the sketch of this artwork or the artwork reference as part of the instruction list of this class. So we'll start by creating a background or the color of our leaf for a red flash caladium leaf. We'll create a graded wash using Carmine, same as how we painted our washes in the previous lesson. So same, the idea here is to create shadows at the center, slowly transitioning from dark to light. And I'm gonna start to apply it on the right section of the leaf. So just a refresher, to do a graded wash, I'll start with creating shadows. So I will be using a small brush and prepare a thick mixture of Carmine. Again, always ensure that it's wet so we can blend it. So I'll apply this thick mixture in a small section of the leaf, starting from the veins. And then I'll soften these edges by lightly dragging color from it with a bigger brush with clean water to create our midtones. Then do the same approach, but this time softening the edges of our midtones and dragging it with water to create our highlights. Again, the tip here is to ensure that these mixtures are wet enough so it can blend and spread across the sections of the areas that we will be painting. So this would serve as a base wash of our leaf. Same with what we did on the previous lesson, we're going to do negative painting or not painting over these vein sketches to show our detail. Take note that we're gonna do it section by section so our mixtures won't dry out. So I'm gonna apply a Carmine graded wash for the other sections. I'm gonna do bigger sections first. And once we're done with the bigger ones, let's continue to apply the graded wash technique in the smaller areas of our leaf. So as you can see, we have achieved creating shadows at the middle, slowly transitioning from dark to light, creating our midtones and highlights, showing tonal values to add an effect to our illustration. Now let's work on the left side of the leaf. Be cautious on the vein at the middle and not paint over it, because it shows the main division of our caladium leaf. So once done, let's wait for this layer to dry out and proceed to painting our caladium mist muffet. Same approach, so let's apply a graded wash technique here, but this time using sap green watercolor. Same as what we did with the other leaf, we'll work on the bigger section first, then move on with the smaller ones. Once done, let's wait for this base wash to dry out, then move on with the next layer for the caladium red flash. Actually, by this time, the first layer has completely dried out, so we can apply our glazing technique. So the glazing or the wet and dry technique is a fundamental method in watercolor painting where wet paint is applied onto a dry paper surface. So what we'll do is apply like a wet mixture on this dry layer or dry first layer to create hard edges and details. This technique would actually enable us to build textures for our caladium red flash. In the wet and dry technique or the glazing technique, it's really essential to ensure that our first layer is completely dried out before we add our next layer so it wouldn't bleed with each other. So let's start creating our details. I'll prepare a watery or a milk-like mixture of Hooker's green and dab to create small spots for the leaf. I'll be adding these spots in this area not only to build our texture but to also build our leaf shape. The idea here is to actually mimic the texture of a caladium leaf by applying like spots or freckles to the leaf. My goal is to just apply these spots on the side of the veins and outline of the leaf so we can show the actual shape of our caladium leaf. And I'm not gonna add these in the center as normally caladium leaves only has textures in the edges. I'll leave out spaces for us to be able to show the bright pink sections or the pink gradients of the leaf, showing dimension to our painting. And as you can see, the spots and ovals I'm creating are very regular in shape so it can look more realistic. By now, you can see that our details are already starting to build, but we will further make it defined by adding another layer later. Now, continue to apply that technique on the left section of the leaf. You can tilt your paper to better follow the direction of the veins of your leaves. And since we're doing a wet and dry technique and slowly building up our texture through multiple layers, let us wait for this thin layer to dry out first. While waiting for a texture to dry out, I'll move on with painting details to my caladium mist muffet. So this time, I'll be adding spots and freckles in pink. So I'll use Carmine gouache for this. The gouache needs to be thick and pigmented so it looks more opaque and less transparent, basically making the gouache work as acrylic rather than as watercolor. So I'll just spontaneously add these dots and not making it so uniform so it doesn't look unrealistic. And in caladiums, it's not just composed of a single color of spots, so I'll use another color to create multiple dots and ovals. For my next color, I'll just mix white with Carmine gouache and create like a pastel pink pigment. So I'll apply dots in some of the spaces or overlapping the previous Carmine spots we have created. Again, you can freely be spontaneous with this, but ensure that you leave out spaces to show the color of our leaf. You can also apply a few spots in a lighter pink to add more details. And as you can see in the wet and dry or the glazing technique, we're able to make strong details without bleeding with the previous wash we created. This is how I build up details and color in my illustration. So we're done with our caladium mist muffet. We can now move on with finalizing our caladium red flash. I normally follow or do this approach, moving from one illustration to another to save time and to be able to create two illustrations. So now let's finalize our details for our caladium red flash by adding a thick mixture of Hooker's green and dab in some spots. Idea here is to leave out spaces from the graded wash background and first layer of texture to be able to show dimension and depth to our leaf. This way, we also get to show dark and light tones of Hooker's green. And as you can see, we're able to show the shape of the leaf without creating like a harsh outline to it. This trick is what I normally do in my illustrations to make it look more realistic. So these are our leaves, our caladium red flash and caladium mist muffet. So we were able to learn how to apply the wet on dry or the glazing technique and how it would allow us to build colors, texture, and details by applying a wet mixture on a completely dry surface. So thank you for painting with me and see you in my next lesson.